two arguments that I think are very compelling. I put them at a top tier, not to disparage, of course, the other arguments, which I have used because I find they have widespread appeal, like the moral argument or the Kalam argument, would be particular kinds of cosmological arguments from the universe. But unlike the Kalam argument, they're not based on trying to prove the universe began in the finite past. In fact, I would say when it comes to the Kalam cosmological argument, trying to prove the universe began, therefore it has a cause, that cause is God. I would say a lower tiered version of that is the one that tries to use scientific evidence to show the universe began to exist, because scientific evidence is very tentative, and the theoretical physics surrounding the idea of whether the universe began or whether it was a multiverse or other things like that, it quickly goes above people's pay grades. And to rely on that tentative scientific evidence, I think it can serve as a signpost for sure to explore the issue. But that scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe, I don't think it's as solid as philosophical evidence, especially the kind that Alex Pruss has argued for with something called causal finitism. Alex has tried to show, he's a philosopher at Baylor University here in Texas. He has shown, I believe, that causal chains cannot be infinite in length. And if that is true, then the causal chains that make up the past of the universe could not be infinite, and so the past cannot be infinite. But so we're getting into philosophical arguments, but even here, people object to those arguments, like St. Thomas Aquinas did, by trying to say that, well, no, you can't philosophically prove that it's impossible for the past to be infinite. Now, the other cosmological arguments, like the argument from contingency or motion, they don't start with that controversial premise, the universe began. It just says, look, it starts with premises that are much less controversial. And that's good for an argument. When you want to make a deductive argument, you want to have as least controversial premises as possible. So the argument from contingency says, hey, things exist. Well, that's pretty obvious. And then the next thing is, things could have been different. And we all have very deep intuitions that things could have been different. We get mad when somebody doesn't invite us to lunch. When someone at the office didn't ask us what we wanted at lunch. Imagine if they said, well, it couldn't have been different anyways. Yeah. Everything is necessary. Well, no, we have this sense that, oh, things could have been different. Why are things the way they could be? Yeah, there is stuff now. There could have been less stuff, or could there have been nothing? That goes to the age-old question, why is there something rather than nothing? Yeah. And so there we're just, you're right, that's a big question. The argument from motion asks the question, not only is there something, but it's moving and changing. That seems obvious, but how does it change? Like, how is that possible that something could be one thing and then become another thing? How does it change? It can't change itself, because that seems like a contradiction, just like it'd be a contradiction to create yourself. It must be changed by something else. Then here, that argument from infinity, it's easier to apply that infinite changers or infinite contingent things don't explain the whole series. So a pro here is that, a few pros. Number one, They at least start out with premises that are not that controversial. Number two, the arguments, I think, have more appeal to atheists because atheists have not been exposed to them as much. Yeah. And so they're more open to hearing them. They're not as familiar, and thus there's not as much contempt or, I've been there, done that. The next point I would raise is that, number three, the arguments from motion and contingency have an easier time getting you to divine attributes. That I would say these arguments ultimately show there is an infinite necessary being, or there is a being that is just pure actuality. And so what's great about these arguments is it's easy to deduce God's infinite attributes from the ultimate infinite causes that the argument's conclusions naturally lead to. Though I will say another con is that these arguments, there is no easy argument for the existence of God because, it's a complex subject. They can, as you drill down into them, become more complicated. But I do think the other 3 points that I raised before do raise them high up in the tier, and I've enjoyed sharing them with others. That's why I made a contingency argument and the argument from motion one of my key arguments in a debate I recently had with Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic. Yeah. And I thought that debate went over very well. In fact, Alex didn't even touch my argument from motion and barely interacted with the contingency argument. So I think they're quite powerful arguments.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for checking out this clip from the Practical Theism podcast. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to check out the full episode, you can do so by finding it on our YouTube channel. Definitely consider subscribing and ringing that little bell so you can continue to get updates, notifications when we release new episodes and new clips just like this one. I hope to see you soon.